Okay, welcome back, everybody. After a very, very short break, we have joining us Mark Pendleton. Mark is the founder of Coffee Break Languages, there was another title for that as well before
Radiolingua. Yeah.
Radiolingua. I'm sorry. I'm really excited to have Mark joining us. Like I think I said in the very beginning, I actually listened to all, I think, 4 seasons that there were at the time of Coffee Break French. And Geraldine, a person that Mark has worked with on one of the Coffee Break French episodes or seasons, also works at Chatterbug. So it's fantastic to have you here. It's actually kind of funny when we just met right before going live, hearing you in my ear like I have a million times before, and now you're actually here. So Mark will be talking about how to optimize your day and maximize your learning, and I'll come back at the end for Q&A. So ask any questions in chat, and I'll come back at the end. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
Thank you, Scott, and thanks for the opportunity to speak at this event. It's a really fascinating event, and I've enjoyed the various presentations so far. My presentation is basically going to be about how you can optimize your day and maximize your learning. By that, I mean take advantage of the opportunities that you have in the course of a day to use those opportunities to learn and to improve your language skills in whatever way you can. Now, obviously, we realize I just want to make sure that all these slides are okay. So in our typical days, in normal times, perhaps, we have opportunities like going for a coffee or relaxing or going to the gym or even on your commute to work. But the fact is, at the moment, this probably is more like what your day involves when you're perhaps not allowed to get out. Perhaps you have to work by remote methods and you spend most of your day, like I do at the moment, on Zoom or other systems. Or perhaps you've got children at home who are learning their materials at the same time as you're trying to do your work or trying to do your learning. And you're perhaps the most interesting aspect of your day, the most exciting point of the day is when you can get out into the garden and perhaps do some exercise or something like that. But all of these opportunities, all of these times are possibilities for actually doing some real learning while you are doing other things. And that's really what we specialize in a sense, at Coffee Break. Over the past 14 years, we've been creating content to allow learners around the world to learn in their coffee breaks, or indeed when they're doing other things like commuting to work or having a walk or something like that. Obviously, at the current moment, things are a little bit different and we can't always necessarily get out to do the normal things that we would. But in this presentation, I'm hoping to look at ways in which you can turn your downtime, the time that you have available and perhaps are using for other things, into your do time, and hopefully benefit from that do time and do something valuable with that time that you have available. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to be looking at 10 tips to help you plan your day around your language learning. And also looking at what I call micro-learning, what's known as micro-learning, but coffee break style. And I'll explain exactly what I mean by that. As Scott said, if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and I'll be happy to answer questions at the end or indeed afterwards in the chat. But let's get started as to our 10 tips to help you plan your day around language learning, because ultimately when we are trying to learn a language, sometimes we do have time, sometimes we have time that we can set aside for learning a language. And that perhaps in traditional times may be attending a class or taking an online learning session or something like that. But perhaps it's a little different now, it's a little difficult to do that. And what I'd like to do is look at these 10 tips to help you make the most of the time that you have available. So let's begin. First of all, let's start at the very beginning of the day, when you're perhaps having your shower or in the bath or something like that, because what you can start doing even at that point is planning what you're going to be doing during the course of the day. So you can think through what you're doing during the course of the day and talk to yourself, tell yourself what you're going to do or what you're doing. Now, a French example here, you could simply use the present tense and say something like, today I go to the park with the children or something like that. Or you can give yourself a little more, something more interesting to say, perhaps, although at the moment it's a little difficult to find interesting things to do. But perhaps you're going to pick up the weeds in the garden or something like that. So If you know the words and phrases for this, then you can already use them. And if you don't, then you can look them up and try to, perhaps not in the shower. Maybe don't take your phone or your dictionary into the shower. That wouldn't really be very effective. But the idea here is that from the very beginning of the day, you're programming yourself. You're trying to get yourself into a way of thinking about what it is you're going to do during that day, but using the language to do that. So whatever language or languages you're learning, talk through what you're going to do over the course of the day, perhaps when you're in the shower. So that's your number one tip. Let's move on and look at number two. Number two is all about notes. And I carry a notebook with me wherever I go. I love a real notebook. I know lots of people like notes apps on their phones, for example, but I actually love a real notebook to take notes in. And the kind of notes I take all the time, whatever language I'm particularly learning at that stage, I take notes on words I know, words I don't know. Perhaps even writing down the words that you are familiar with will help you to reinforce them and consolidate them. And challenge yourself to learn a few words each day and choose the words from your daily experiences. So from whatever you experience during that day, you can choose those words to help you work through your day and take notes along those lines. Perhaps if you are able to get out and about and you think, okay, do I know the word for daffodil, for example, in the language I'm learning? So if you don't, write that down, and it's the first thing that you're going to look up when you get the time to look that up a little later on. So notes, take them, use whatever method is best for you. The third suggestion here I have got is all about digital immersion. So digital immersion, and this is something I'm sure many of you do already, change the language of the interface on your phone, or your computer, your TV, your social media accounts, your Netflix account, or whatever it happens to be, so that when you experience that, and if you're doing that regularly, the more you experience it, then the more you can look at the language that you're learning, and the phrases, the words, the interface that you're using will eventually go in, and it will be something that we will recognize without thinking about it. One of the key things about this is that very often you're very used to seeing things already. You'll know where things are, so you'll know what certain words are in the layout of your Facebook wall or your social media account or whatever it happens to be. So you know where those phrases are, therefore you'll kind of almost know what the words mean in the foreign language. Especially if you're new to a language, then it is very useful to do this. So take an opportunity to immerse yourself digitally in the language that you're learning. One thing I should have perhaps said right at the beginning when I was explaining a little about Coffee Break. At Coffee Break, we try to create content to help learners learn in whatever way they can. And what we often see is that we actually produce the kind of content for learners who don't believe they are good at learning languages. And many of our community many of the learners in our community are people who perhaps have had poor experiences learning language. Perhaps they tried it at school and it didn't work for them, or they've tried it as an adult and it didn't quite work for them. And what we try to do is help them achieve that. And this is, again, really what we're focusing on here. Little tips that you can use to bring the language into the day as you're going through your day. Okay, let's move on. Our fourth tip, and this is a little bit trickier now in the sense that what I would also like you to do is take a tour. But perhaps what you could do is take a virtual tour at the moment. You can use Google Maps Street View to take a virtual tour of a city that you can't visit at the moment. So if you go into maps.google.com, and then there's a little person icon down at the bottom right, and you drag that onto a street of the city that you would love to be visiting at the moment, then you can virtually look around you. And when you're virtually looking around you, what you can see are shop names, advertisements on walls, billboards, and so on, and on the back of buses and things. So you can take this virtual tour without actually being there. But through doing that, you'll see lots of examples of the language. And sometimes that is simply about trying to work out what things mean, or perhaps practicing your pronunciation. As I'm walking about a foreign city, wherever it happens to be in times when we're allowed to walk about foreign cities, I always look around myself and try to work out how you would pronounce certain things, or why is something spelled in a particular way, or on an advert, why is there a direct object pronoun there, or why is it the dative case in German or whatever. So really look around you, take that virtual tour when when you can take a real tour, take the real tour. If you can't take the real tour, then a virtual tour actually is pretty good going too. So use Google Maps Street View or the equivalent on whatever system you use in order to take a virtual tour. Or perhaps you could take a real tour around your house or flat. Now, this is an image. It's not my house. It's just an image of a kitchen. It perhaps needs a little bit of cleaning up, and it's perhaps the reality for a lot of us at the moment. But what I'm suggesting here is take a real tour, and it may be a walk or around your local area if you're able to do that, or even just around your flat or your home, and think about what you see and describe those situations to yourself. Think of numbers, think of spelling, think of foreign equivalents of English words. So when you're looking around and seeing that messy kitchen or whatever it is, do you know all those words in the language you're learning? Or is there a description that you can give? Can you say that there is a dirty pan beside the sink? Think of these things and try to come up with simple sentences that you can then try to put into the foreign language. And sometimes it can actually help the whole process of cleaning up, the tidying up the kitchen into something that's useful. Well, obviously it's useful to tidy up your kitchen, but at the same time, it could be useful to learn a little bit of the language while you're doing that. So take a real tour if you can, out and about, or if you're not able to get out and about, even just think about what is around you at the moment. One thing to mention here, we've got a video on our YouTube channel called How Learning a Language Can Be a Walk in the Park, and that's exactly what this video is about. It explains the process of talking to yourself and explaining things. It may just be vocabulary, it may be more complex sentences and so on, but do have a look at that if you can, and I'll put the link for that in the chat a little later. My next suggestion for maximizing your time is get other people involved. If you live with other people, get them involved too in your learning, and that might be your children. It may be while you're preparing a meal, or while they're helping you prepare a meal, and it's a great opportunity to focus on vocabulary, focus on instructions, and so on. Or it may be getting someone else that you're living with, or whom you can contact on social media, or in a video call or something like that. Tell them what you're learning, and perhaps even teach them what you've been learning if they're willing to learn. So get the rest of the family or your flatmates involved in learning the language, or teach them what you know in person or on a video call. But when you involve other people around you, it gives you that motivation. It gives you also a sense of accountability, in that they will want to know what you've learned most recently. Our next tip is all about using the time that you have available to do the important things that you want to do, but you can also combine that with language learning. So, for example, use every opportunity, whether you're doing some fitness, whether you're taking a walk, or just taking a rest. There's lots and lots of learning content that you can access, and then use that when it suits best. And let me say a little about podcasts. Obviously, we create podcasts, and I think podcasts are a fantastic way of using language learning content, because podcasts are the kind of things that you can stop, you can pause, you can listen again, you can slow them down, you can speed them up if you're listening through something again. And also the whole idea about podcasts is that podcasts are ongoing content. So you'll be notified when there's a new episode available of the particular podcast that you're listening to, be that coffee break or another podcast. So I definitely think that podcasts are a very useful tool in your language learning. And they will fit around what it is you're doing, whether that's working out, whether it's taking a walk, or just relaxing. Okay, moving on, and this one is very important as well. It's more than just taking notes; it's tracking your success. I would like you to keep a record of all your learning. And that is everything that you do. So every time you do a little bit of learning, whether it's a walk and you noted a few words, or you're describing your messy kitchen or something like that, all of this language learning counts. It'll help you to see your progress. And remember that a few short bursts of learning every day can add up to significant amounts of learning over time. And sometimes we do feel, oh, I'm not making the progress that I'd like to with learning. But actually, when you see it written down and you see, well, I've spent 5 minutes in that, 5 minutes in that, oh, I did a 20-minute podcast while I was working out. it does begin to add up, and you begin to say, well, actually, I have done quite well today, and that helps your motivation too. I also like to use an app to track my successes, if you like, and it is that there are many apps available. The one I use is called Streaks on iOS. And Streaks allows you to keep a track of what you've been able to do. You can set up, for example, learned 5 new verbs, did a reading passage, listened to a podcast, and there are 6 things that you can set up on each screen, and you simply tap them as you complete them. And it also lets you set up, for example, if you're learning 6 new verbs, you can set up 6 little segments. So each time you learn a new verb, or you learn a new piece of vocabulary, or whatever it happens to be, you can track that very easily. So there are lots of Streaks style apps out there, habit tracker on Android too. So I would definitely suggest you looking at one of those kind of apps. Let's continue. Our next suggestion here, number 9, is about really planning your day around the whole day, and when it gets to the end of the day, basically planning tomorrow. So at the end of the day, plan tomorrow. So plan tomorrow today. Once you've tracked your learning for today, consider what worked and what didn't. Then identify a few short sessions which you'd like to include in tomorrow's learning. So basically, the idea would be that if you're getting to the end of the day and you're thinking, well, that worked really well when I went the walk today, or I spent some time in the garden listening to a podcast, so I'll try to do that again tomorrow, and perhaps try to schedule it in if you've got that the possibility of doing that. By planning tomorrow, it means that you're already set up for the day before you even reach that day. So as soon as you hit the shower in the morning, you know what you're going to be doing for the rest of the day. And finally, when your head hits the pillow at night, then make sure you're also thinking about the language then. I know that might be a little tough, but just before you fall asleep, think through what you've done today. And again, in the foreign language. So tell yourself what you've achieved, tell yourself what you've done in simple sentences. Again, you could use, well, depending on which language you're learning, you could use the perfect tense or the preterite tense or a past tense, or you could describe your feelings using an imperfect, or obviously it depends on the language that you're learning. But at the end of the day, try to say perhaps 3 or 4 things that you have done in the course of that day. And that ensures that your day from the beginning to the end has been about learning languages. Okay. We've looked at 10 tips to help you plan around your day around language learning. Let me share now very quickly just a few little pieces of information, or a few suggestions about micro-learning, coffee break style. What I mean by that is literally you can fit learning into just a few minutes. So if you've only got 2 minutes, you can do something useful within your language. And we're going to do that right now. I've got here a challenge. It's a Spanish challenge. If you happen to be a Spanish learner, you should, I don't think you're going to be able to hear the music, so apologies for that, but you will see 30 seconds on the screen. You're going to get 9 letters. You've got to unscramble those 9 letters into one word. But if you can't find that one word, then perhaps you can find other words that are made up from the letters that you see. So here we go, 30 seconds to unscramble this Spanish word. Okay, so if you are a Spanish learner, you should have worked out, or perhaps should have worked out, that was caballero, un caballero, a gentleman, or originally a knight. But there were other words there. Well done, Geraldine. I see that you got that one. Other words there, for example, lo, bar, cala, una cala is a cove, cebolla, an onion, lloraba, he or she was crying, from the verb llorar. And again, caballero. So literally 30 seconds there we took to work out what that word meant. So literally within those 2 minutes that we've suggested, you can do things like that. And if you can't find word games, you can make them up yourself. There's a site called wordmine.info, and you can ask this site to find I don't know, like 20 words in German that have 10 letters in them and things like that. So first of all, play a word game if you can, or just look around you and identify unknown vocabulary. So just picking out a couple of things from what you see around you. Let's move on. Perhaps you've got a little more than 2 minutes. If you've got more than 2 minutes, 5 minutes, time for perhaps a slightly longer coffee. That was our espresso, very much an espresso shot of learning. Perhaps this is a double espresso or something like that. And if you've got 5 minutes, then again, there are lots of things you can do. For example, look at social media, and there are lots of language learning accounts. We've got our Instagram account there where we post mini language lessons all the time. So in Italian, se puoi sognarlo, puoi farlo. If you can dream it, you can do it. And you can think about that. Well, why is there a direct object pronoun that's stuck on the end of that infinitive? And think about what you're seeing there. So whether it's browsing Instagram, revisiting your notes, playing Lucky Dip. What I like to do with Lucky Dip is basically open a dictionary and see which words I know from where my finger lands. And if there are not any words there that I know, then I'll write some down in my notebook. Or check your flashcards. If you use a flashcard app, then you can check your flashcards quickly within those 5 minutes. If you've got 10 minutes, time for perhaps a relaxed latte or a latte macchiato or something like that, then perhaps it would be a good time to watch a YouTube video. We've got a huge selection of YouTube videos on our account. Of course, there are hundreds of thousands of fantastic YouTube videos for learners. So watch a YouTube video or check out today's headlines. So you can find, in fact, there are sites online where you can find almost all the newspapers in the world and the front page of them. So just check out the headlines and see what you can understand from that. Or perhaps listen to a song and identify 5 new words that you didn't know in that song. Again, you'll be able to find lyrics easily online to try that. So 10-minute tips there you can use for your language learning. And if you've got a little longer, perhaps time for a coffee and a bit of Kaffee und Kuchen, perhaps, then perhaps you could listen to a podcast or plan your next live session or live lesson. Or perhaps research a recipe for tonight's dinner and look up the recipe in the foreign language, see all the vocabulary that you need there, check that you've got the ingredients, and then perhaps make it with your family and talk about the words later on in the day. So just a few quick tips there to show you that even if you've just got 2 minutes or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, then you're still able to do some language learning and fit them into the course of the day. Okay, that is what I have to share with you today. I hope that you have found this useful, and I hope that it gives you a chance to optimize your day so that you can maximize your language learning. Thank you very much for listening, and I believe that Scott will be joining us again in just a moment. But thank you. I'll have a look at the questions in the chat too. So I'll come back full screen.
Thank you so much, Mark. We did have a handful of questions. The last one up here was about beginner content, right? About A1 content. So you produce this podcast series. How do you design content for brand new beginners, like to kind of get into a language for the first time, versus more experienced learners? Like how do you?
Yeah, so when we're planning our content for absolute beginners, all of our courses start at an absolute beginner level. So A1, in fact, pre-A1, really, really basic stuff. One of the things that we focus on hugely at the beginning is pronunciation, because we feel that if you can start to lay firm foundations with good pronunciation, then that's very useful. It will help you build on that later. So in terms of the content, all of our podcasts at the beginning feature a lot of English. We're teaching the foreign language through English. And in all of the podcasts, as you'll remember from Coffee Break, we have a learner. So the teacher is working with a learner. For example, we're recording Coffee Break Swedish at the moment, and I am the learner in Coffee Break Swedish. So I'm learning Swedish along with Hannah, our teacher. So a lot happens in English, but because there's a learner there, the learner is asking questions and also getting things wrong. So the teacher is helping the learner and correcting those mistakes that the learner might make and so on. So the content at the early stages is very much supported with a teacher, with the learner, and also with a lot of English to begin with. Some people like lots of input in the foreign language. We believe, and our listeners feed this back to us, that in actual fact, if you are building up the motivation to learn a language from the beginning, perhaps listening to 10 minutes of the language with no English scaffolding at all is going to be quite a challenge. And whether you can keep that going, yes, you would pick up the rhythms of the language, you'd pick up the pronunciation, but will you understand everything? That's why we include a lot of English from the early stages. And then that English comes out as we gradually move through the seasons.
This question actually came up, I think, at the end of my talk, and I didn't address it, but it's probably this is a follow-up to sort of how you were answering as well about pronunciation. Somebody was asking, how do you work on your pronunciation in a really effective manner? You're a podcast, and so you can't really get feedback from the student or give them feedback. So both the way that you approach it, but then also just sort of ideally, if you're working, like if you're learning a language, how do you go about improving your own pronunciation?
By listening as much as I possibly can to different accents. I'm addicted to Netflix shows. I watch a lot of Netflix and try to listen as much as possible. But I think also trying to say things, again, all this idea of talking to yourself in the shower when no one can hear you, that's probably quite a good idea if you're out and about, even talking. I do talk to myself quite a lot, and although you're not getting the immediate feedback from a teacher, you can't necessarily go for a walk with a teacher, but you can compare what you're saying to what is being said on a podcast, for example, and trying to work on that. I think also the sounds, depending on what language you're working on, the sounds of the language will be quite new to you. So you'll be learning things like in Swedish, we're learning the SJ sound, the hu, which is quite a tricky sound to produce at the beginning, but really trying to break that sound down. And if you've got the opportunity, like I had within the podcast, to ask Hannah, our teacher, so what are you doing with your mouth at that point? And we can actually see what's happening with the mouth, and that helps you to pick up these sounds. So use every opportunity that you have to interact with a teacher. Perhaps that could be on something like italki or other platforms where you're working directly with a native speaker to analyze how they are saying things. And don't be afraid to ask a native speaker that you're working with in a Skype conversation, for example, to really pronounce very slowly and into the camera in a clear way so that you can actually see what's happening with their mouth to make that sound.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. That's perfect time. And again, thank you very, very much for taking your time today to join us and to share your tips with us. Everybody, we got a lot of great feedback already, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I hope it's been useful.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, so we'll take a short break, and then we'll be back with the next speaker in a few minutes.